For the entirety of human history, we have been a species that shouts into an empty, cosmic cathedral, and we have been met with nothing but the echo of our own voice. This is the great, haunting mystery of our existence, the profound and terrifying loneliness that we have come to call the Fermi paradox. In a galaxy of 100 billion stars, in a universe of 2 trillion galaxies, a place so vast that life must have arisen billions of times over, we are surrounded by an impenetrable, absolute, and perfect silence. We have built colossal ears in the deserts of the world, the Very Large Array, the Fast Telescope, and have strained them to hear even the faintest, accidental whisper of another intelligence. But for decades, all we have received is the cold, chaotic hiss of the cosmos, the random chatter of pulsars, the explosive roar of quasars, and the fading, ghostly hum of the Big Bang itself. This great silence has become the defining filter of our reality, a wall so high and so thick that it has led us to only 2, equally dreadful, conclusions. Either we are, by some impossible statistical miracle, completely and utterly alone, or the universe is a dark forest, and the silence is a survival strategy, a collective hush from civilizations who know far better than to make a sound. For decades, this has been the stalemate. Then 3I/Atlas arrived, and the silence was not just broken. It was shattered. The initial study of 3I/Atlas was a frantic, purely physical investigation. We treated it as a celestial object, a comet, and our panic was focused on its mass, its composition, its impossible, non-natural elements, and its unnerving, unnatural fragmentation. Our telescopes, from Hubble to the James Webb, were pointed at it to see its light, to analyze its chemical soul. But we were looking in the wrong spectrum. We were analyzing the smoke, and we had completely missed the fire. The discovery was made not by an astronomer, but by a young, sleep-deprived radio astronomer at a remote listening post, a part of the Deep Space Network. Her job was not to look for a signal, but to filter out the chaotic, natural radio noise that the object's massive plasma coma was emitting as it interacted with the solar wind. It was a routine, thankless task, designing an algorithm to clean the data so that other scientists could get a clearer picture. For weeks, she had been battling a strange, persistent interference in the data, a rhythmic, narrowband spike that she had assumed was a fault in the receiver, or perhaps a new, secret military satellite from Earth. On a hunch, she triangulated the signal. She ran a cross-reference with 2 other radio observatories, and her blood ran cold. The signal was not terrestrial. It was not a glitch. It was moving. It was coming from a single, precise point in the heavens, a point that perfectly matched the calculated position of 3I/Atlas. The moment this data was confirmed, a new and far more secret Atlas panic began, this time not in the halls of geological surveys, but in the soundproofed bunkers of the National Security Agency and NASA's High Command. The Deep Space Network, our planetary communications array, our telephone line to the Voyager probes and the Mars rovers, was quietly and completely commandeered. Its powerful dishes were turned, in unison, toward the object, no longer as passive listeners, but as an active, focused surveillance array. The results that came back were immediate and undeniable. This was not the chaotic, broadband scream of a natural phenomenon. This was not the rhythmic, simple pulse of a spinning pulsar. This was a signal of profound, deliberate, and terrifying intelligence. It was narrowband, a signal confined to a sliver of the radio spectrum so thin that it must be the product of an artificial transmitter. It was complex, containing nested layers of repeating patterns. And it was powerful. The world's leaders were presented with a new, horrifying truth. The object in our solar system was not just an anomaly, it was a broadcast. The great silence was over. The Fermi paradox was solved. The universe, it turned on a dime, was not only not empty, but one of its inhabitants had just kicked in our door and begun to speak. And as the world's supercomputers were brought online in a frantic, global race to understand this new language, the first, and most terrifying, realization began to dawn. This was not a greeting. This was not a call for help. This was a declaration. As the initial, classified data began to circulate among a terrified global elite, the first instinct of the control faction within the Aegis Council was to find a natural explanation. The alternative was simply too catastrophic to consider. The order was given: find a way to discredit this. Find a way to call it a natural phenomenon. The first, and most obvious, natural explanation for a repeating, rhythmic signal from space is a pulsar. Pulsars are the hyperdense, rapidly spinning corpses of dead stars. As they spin, they beam out intense jets of radiation, and if this beam sweeps past Earth, we detect it as a pulse, with a regularity so precise it rivals an atomic clock. For a brief, hopeful 48 hours, the pulsar theory was the preferred explanation. But this hope was annihilated by the world's leading theoretical physicists, including figures like Michio Kaku, who were secretly briefed on the data. In a classified debriefing, Kaku and others reportedly laid out a case so ironclad that it ended the debate immediately. The signal from 3I/Atlas, they argued, was 100%, irrefutably, and terrifyingly artificial. The first argument was its frequency. Pulsars broadcast their energy across a massive, wide swath of the radio spectrum. They are loud and messy. The 3I/Atlas signal, by contrast, was narrowband. It was a single, pure tone, occupying a sliver of the spectrum less than 1 Hz wide. In nature, there is no known process that can create such a clean, focused signal. It is the definitive fingerprint of a high-efficiency, technological transmitter. It is not a scream, it is a whisper, focused like a laser. The second argument was its modulation. A pulsar's pulse is a simple on-off beat, a product of its dumb, physical spin. The 3I/Atlas signal was not a simple pulse, it was modulated. The carrier wave was being subtly altered, its amplitude and frequency shifted in complex, nested patterns. This is the very definition of carrying information. It is the same principle that allows your car radio to turn a simple FM wave into complex music. This was not just a beat, this was a language. The third and final argument was its lack of dispersion. Radio waves of different frequencies travel through the gas of interstellar space at slightly different speeds. A signal from a distant pulsar will be smeared, with the high frequencies arriving slightly before the low ones. The 3I/Atlas signal had almost zero dispersion. This was the final, terrifying nail in the coffin. It meant the signal was not an ancient, billion-year-old echo from a distant star. It was local. It was being broadcast now, from inside our solar system. When Michio Kaku and his colleagues finished their presentation, the mood in the bunker was grim. The last shred of plausible deniability was gone. The science was absolute. This was not a natural object. It was not a cosmic anomaly. It was a transmitter. And it was broadcasting. Once the signal was confirmed as an artificial, local broadcast, the mission of the Deep Space Network shifted immediately from detection to intersection. A global, multi-observatory program of very long baseline interferometry, or VLBI, was initiated in secret. This technique is a marvel of human ingenuity. By linking multiple radio telescopes across the globe, from the high deserts of Chile to the plains of Australia, and synchronizing them with atomic clocks, astronomers can effectively create a single, virtual telescope with the resolving power of a dish the size of the Earth itself. This gives us the ability to pinpoint the source of a signal in the sky with a precision so fine it is like reading a newspaper in New York from a cafe in Paris. The original, single-dish detection had confirmed the signal was coming from the general blob of 3I/Atlas. But general was no longer good enough. They needed to know the exact source. Was it coming from the whole object? the coma, or something inside it. The VLBI array was turned on, its component dishes staring, unblinking, at the object's predicted position. The data began to flow, terabytes of it, which were fed into a supercomputer at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, the global center for this kind of high-resolution analysis. The first images to resolve from the data were a noisy, chaotic map of the natural radio emissions from the plasma coma, the static cloud of gas interacting with the solar wind. This was the noise they had expected. But as the algorithm filtered this natural static away, a single, brilliant, and unnervingly stable point of light began to emerge from the center. It was a star sapphire blue point on their screens, a hotspot of artificial, narrowband energy that was not just in a coma, it was at the precise, calculated gravitational center of the entire fragment it swarmed. The signal was not coming from the debris. It was not coming from the gas. It was coming from the core. This was a revolutionary discovery. The fragmentation of free I/Atlas, which we had assumed was the event, was a distraction. The core that we believed had shattered was still there, and it was intact. The object we had seen, the fragments, the debris, was not the object itself. It was a shell. It was a chaff cloud, a form of technological camouflage deployed by the object to hide the transmitter at its heart. The fragmentation was not a breakup, it was the deployment of a stealth field. The true 3I/Atlas, the core, the transmitter, was still in one piece, and it was now sitting naked and exposed in the crosshairs of our planet's most powerful telescope. The implications were chilling. The object had not been damaged. It had deployed. It was now, by all estimations, fully operational. The moment the signal was isolated and confirmed as a clean, artificial broadcast from a single source, the data stream was rerouted. A direct, encrypted fiber optic line was established between the Deep Space Network and a specific, black-walled room at Harvard University, home to one of the world's most advanced quantum supercomputers, a machine normally reserved for modeling the birth of universes. A specialized team of cryptographers, linguists, and mathematicians, the same kind of code-breaker team that had been secretly assembled at Bletchley Park to crack the Enigma code in World War II, was flown in and placed on lockdown. Their job was simple: find the pattern. Find the language. The signal was not just a simple beep. As the first data sets were fed into the supercomputer, the initial analyses were baffling. The signal was a storm of complex, shifting modulations that seemed, at first, to be a more sophisticated form of chaos. The machine, trying to find a simple, linear pattern, failed. It was not a simple 1-2-3 beat. It was not a repeating message like the Arecibo broadcast. Then, one of the younger mathematicians on the team, someone raised on information theory rather than classic linguistics, proposed a new approach. Stop looking for a message in the signal, she argued, and start looking for the architecture of the signal. She was right. They were looking at the words, and they had missed the grammar. The team retasked the supercomputer to perform a topological data analysis, a complex new field of mathematics that searches for hidden geometric shapes and patterns in large, chaotic datasets. They were no longer looking for a 1D line of code, they were looking for a 3D structure. The computer ran for 12 hours. And then the image resolved on the screen, and the room fell silent. It was not a line. It was a shape. The signal, when mapped in 3 dimensions, was a complex, rotating, and perfectly symmetrical geometric object. It was a tesseract, a 4-dimensional cube, unfolded and projected into the 3-dimensional language of radio waves. It was a structure of such breathtaking mathematical complexity and perfection that it could only be the product of an intelligence that didn't just use physics, it thought in physics. The rhythmic pulse that the radio astronomers had first detected was that the sound of this 4D object spinning, its vertices and edges passing through our 3D perception. The shocking part was not just the complexity, but the implication. As Michio Kaku would later note in a classified memo, a being that communicates in the language of 4D geometry is not just more advanced than us. It may be to us as we are to a flat, two-dimensional drawing. We were not just listening to a signal, we were looking at the shadow of the entity that sent it. Once the Harvard team understood the structure of the signal, the 4D Tesseract shape, they could finally begin to read the message that was encoded onto its surface. The geometric shape was the envelope, the architecture of the broadcast. But the data packets themselves, the ones and zeros of the message, were encoded in a different, even more fundamental language. As the team drilled down into the modulation of the carrier wave, they found the two Rosetta Stones of the cosmos, the two things that any technological civilization, no matter how alien, would eventually discover. The first was prime numbers. The signal was not a continuous stream, it was a series of long, complex bursts separated by moments of silence. When the team analyzed the duration of these bursts and the silences between them, the pattern was unmistakable. The sequence was 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. A repeating, unbroken chain of prime numbers. This was the hello, the we are intelligent handshake that Carl Sagan himself had proposed for our own first contact. It was the universe's most basic, undeniable proof of a mathematical mind at work. It was a way of saying, this is not chaos. This is thought. But the second discovery is what locked the message in place. The signal was not broadcast on a random frequency. The entire, complex, 4D modulated signal was being transmitted at exactly 1420.40575 MHz. To a layperson, this number is meaningless. To an astrophysicist, it is the most sacred and important number in the entire radio universe. This is the hydrogen line, or the 21-centimeter line. It is the precise frequency at which a neutral hydrogen atom, the most common, simple, and abundant element in the entire cosmos, flicks its spin and emits a tiny, single photon. It is the sound of the universe itself. It is the one, universal, channel that all sentient life would eventually find. It is the cosmic, watering hole where all intelligences would, theoretically, come to speak. The 3I/Atlas entity was not just broadcasting, it was broadcasting with intent. It had chosen the one, public, universal, frequency to ensure that any civilization, no matter how primitive, as long as they had discovered radio astronomy, would be able to find it. And it had used the one, universal, language, prime numbers, to ensure we would know it was intelligent. The combination was a terrifying masterpiece of communication. It was a message that was both impossible to miss and impossible to misinterpret. It was a declaration, written in the base code of the universe itself, and it said, clearly and without question, we are here. We are intelligent. And now, you will listen. The moments after the Harvard team confirmed the mathematical basis of the signal, the prime numbers, the hydrogen line, the 4D tesseract, were, for a few brief hours, ones of quiet, terrified celebration. The secret task force, the cryptographers, and the scientists had achieved the single greatest discovery in human history. They had confirmed, unequivocally, that we were not alone. They had proven that an intelligence not only existed, but was here, in our solar system, speaking the universal language of physics. But this quiet elation was immediately and coldly extinguished. As the initial findings were presented in an emergency, encrypted briefing to the Aegis Council, the secret global body formed during the Atlas Panic, a new, far more terrifying interpretation of the event was put forth. The voice of this sobering new reality was, according to sources, Michio Kaku, a man who had been secretly briefed as one of the world's leading authorities on theoretical physics. His warning allegedly shut down all talk of celebration. He argued that the teen was misinterpreting the event as a greeting. It was, in his expert opinion, a declaration. His reasoning was built on 3 chilling pillars. First, the power. The signal was not a faint, gentle hello designed to be found. It was a roar. The energy required to transmit a stable, 4D modulated signal from a moving object across the vast distances of the solar system, especially one powerful enough to be detected so clearly against the sun's noise, was astronomical. It was, as Kaku reportedly put it, the equivalent of a nuclear-powered lighthouse in a world of candles. This was not a greeting, it was a demonstration of power, a flex of technological superiority so profound it bordered on intimidation. Second, the complexity. A truly benevolent first contact protocol, Kaku argued, would be simple. It would be a repeating, basic, mathematical proof, a Sesame Street guide to the universe, designed to be easily understood by a primitive species. This signal was the exact opposite. It was a data-dense, hyper-complex, 4-dimensional geometric proofs. It was not an invitation to a conversation, it was a data dump. It was the cosmic equivalent of a superior officer kicking in a door, throwing a 1,000-page legal document on the table, and expecting you to understand it. It presumed our attention and, in its complexity, displayed an utter and terrifying indifference to whether we were ready for it or not. Finally, Kaku's warning was about the intent. This was not a dialogue. It was a one-way broadcast. It was not asking questions. It was stating facts. We have been celebrating the end of our loneliness, Kaku is said to have concluded. We should be mourning the end of our anonymity. This is not a greeting. This is a press release from a god, and it is announcing its arrival. With Kaku's warning hanging over them, the Aegis Council gave the Harvard team a new, desperate mandate: stop admiring the signal and crack it. What did the 4D Tesseract actually say? This triggered the most secretive and intense code-breaking effort since the Enigma machine. The global race was on. It wasn't just Harvard. Rival supercomputers in China, Russia, and at private corporate labs were all secretly tasked with the same problem, each nation terrified that another would get the answer first. For days, the effort stalled. They understood the alphabet, the prime numbers, and the architecture, the Tesseract, but the language itself, the meaning encoded in the modulation, was gibberish. The computers, trying to translate the patterns into words, into sounds, into images, found nothing but noise. The breakthrough, as it often does, came not from a machine, but from a human mind that thought differently. A young paleolinguist, brought in for her expertise in dead and structureless languages, reportedly looked at the data streams and had a flash of insight. You're all trying to translate this as a language, she argued. You're looking for hello or we come in peace. An intelligence this advanced wouldn't use words. It would use concepts. It's not sending text, it's sending physics. She was right. The team had been trying to read a book when they should have been looking at a blueprint. This was the Rosetta Stone moment. The team retasked the supercomputer, no longer as a translator, but as a renderer. They hypothesized that the signal's modulations were not words, but values. The complex patterns were not a language, they were a map. They discovered that the key to this map was the very thing that had terrified them from the beginning: the impossible elements and alien isotopic ratios found in the comet's debris. The signal was a legend for this map. In one repeating block, it broadcast the fundamental physical constants of our universe: the precise speed of light, the charge of an electron, the mass of a proton. Then, in the next block, it broadcast a different set of values, numbers that perfectly matched the alien physics of the debris. It was a message that said, here are the values for your universe. And here are the values for our universe. Now you have the key. Now you can read the rest of this message. With this key, the floodgates opened. The data stream was no longer gibberish. It was a direct, mathematical, 3D/4D visual data stream. The computers were no longer translating. They were rendering. And the team could only watch in horror as the first, true message began to build itself on their screens. This is the core of the script. The lights in the Harvard lab are dimmed. The Aegis Council is watching on a secure feed. The supercomputer, now fed with the Rosetta Stone key, begins to render the decoded message. It comes in 3 distinct, horrifying parts. Part 1, the coordinate. The first block of data is not a word, but a 3D, rotating star map of breathtaking complexity. It shows our Milky Way galaxy, highlighting our solar system, but it also contains a second, blazingly bright coordinate. At first, the team assumes this is the origin coordinate, the place the entity came from. A young astronomer corrects them. The coordinate is not in deep space. It is local. The map zooms in, past the orbit of Mars, past the orbit of the Moon. The coordinate is a fixed, non-moving point in geostationary orbit, a Lagrange point of gravitational stability. No, it's simpler than that. The coordinate, when cross-referenced with planetary maps, is a specific, nondescript location on the planet's surface. A set of GPS coordinates for a barren patch of the deep Pacific Ocean, far from any land or shipping lanes. It is not an origin. It is a destination. It is a rendezvous point. Part 2, the warning. The second data block is not a map, but a chillingly clear visual simulation. The screen fills with 2 complex, interacting waveforms. One waveform, which the team labels local, representing us, is chaotic, noisy, and hot. The second waveform, labeled source, representing them, is a perfect, cold, and ordered sine wave. The simulation shows the 2 waves approaching each other. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, as the local wave attempts to touch or interface with the source wave doesn't just repel it. It annihilates it. The chaotic, hot wave is instantly flattened, its energy cancelled out, its very existence erased from the screen, leaving only the cold, perfect, and now dominant source wave behind. It is a visual equation for assimilation or annihilation. It is the most unambiguous, do not touch or stay away message imaginable. It is a warning that any attempt at contact from our side will result in our immediate erasure. Part 3, the one unmistakable word. The final data packet is the most terrifying. After all the complex mathematics, the 4D geometry, the prime numbers, the physics, the signal changes. It starts the hypercomplex broadcast. The team assumes the message is over. Then, a new, far simpler signal appears. It's not 4D. It is a simple, 2D, brute force bitmap image, the exact same low-tech format our own Arecibo message used. The entity was demonstrating that it could speak any language it chose. The team watches, in absolute, frozen horror, as the final image renders, pixel by pixel. It is not a shape. It is not a number. It is a word. And it is not in their language. It is in ours. The entity had been passively listening to our global radio and television broadcasts for decades. The final image to burn itself onto the screen is a single, perfect, and terrifyingly simple word, in stark, block letter English, silence. The atmosphere in the Harvard lab and in the Aegis Council bunker was no longer one of discovery. It was one of pure, undiluted terror. The revelation was complete. The entity was here. It was powerful beyond all comprehension, able to think in 4D. It was aware of us, familiar with our languages. It had designated a meeting spot on our own planet. It had issued a warning that contact with it would result in our annihilation. And it had given us a single, one-word command: silence. This was the true beginning of the Atlas Panic, the geopolitical conspiracy to manage the truth. The leaders of the world were now faced with the most catastrophic dilemma in human history. This truth, this message, could never be made public. The reasons were immediate and absolute. Reason 1, mass hysteria and societal collapse. The public, they argued, could not handle this. The simultaneous, undeniable proof of godlike aliens and the confirmation that they are hostile, or at least, lethally indifferent, would shatter everything. Religions would collapse. Markets would evaporate. Society would eat itself alive in a global wave of terror, riots, and mass suicides. The civilization they were trying to protect would be destroyed by the truth alone. Reason 2, the command itself. How do you enforce silence on a planet of 8 billion people? You can't. The moment the public knew, the first thing they would do is the opposite. Every nation, every corporation, every cult, every university would begin frantically broadcasting, trying to talk back, to negotiate, to pray, or to challenge the entity. And according to the warning simulation, this very act of touching the entity with our signals would be the trigger for our own erasure. The only way to save humanity was to lie to them. Reason 3, the coordinate. The rendezvous point in the Pacific was now the most dangerous and valuable piece of real estate on the planet. If that coordinate leaked, it would start a new, secret world war. Rogue nations, terrorist groups, or tech billionaires would race to that spot, to try and meet the entity, to gain its power, or to trigger the apocalypse. The Aegis Council made its first and most terrible decision. The message must be buried. The scientists who knew were moved to secure black sites, their work now the most dangerous secret on Earth. The Great Normalization plan was enacted. The official, public-facing story was crafted and pushed. Free I/Atlas is a fascinating but ultimately natural and harmless comet. The lie became the planet's only defense. The world is now living a lie. The public watches the boring science reports, while a new, secret, global government frantically tries to figure out how to enforce the command. Operation Silence begins. Under the public guise of solar flares, budget cuts, and environmental regulations, clandestine operations are initiated to quietly ground non-essential satellite launches, to shut down the LHC, and to deploy jammers around the world's most powerful radio transmitters. They are trying to turn down the planet's noise, praying it will be enough. In the Deep Space Network, a single, automated server in a locked room is left to monitor the free I/Atlas signal, which has, for 3 weeks, been repeating the same, terrifying loop, Tesseract coordinate warning silence. Then, one night, it changes. A sensor tech monitoring the feed watches as the loop finishes, and does not restart. The channel goes dead. For a moment, there is only the background hiss of the cosmos. The tech feels a wave of relief, thinking the entity has gone, that it has passed us by. Then, a new signal appears. It's not the complex, 4D broadcast on a public hydrogen line. It is a single, sharp, narrowband ping. The tech checks the system logs. His blood freezes. The ping is not a broadcast. It is a response. It is a perfect, time-coded echo to our own planetary radar systems, the very systems we were using to track it. It felt us watching it. It knows we were intersecting its mail. The mask is off. It knows we know. A second later, the signal changes again. It is no longer on the hydrogen line. It is now broadcasting directly at our military and GPS satellite frequencies. It is a targeted, aggressive, and intimate act. The new message begins to stream. It's not a word. It's not a 4D shape. It is a simple, universal, and unmistakable sequence of numbers, broadcast in clear, repeating bursts. 10. A pause. 9. The pause. 8. The team at the Harvard Black site is scrambled. They run the numbers. It is a countdown. The intervals between the numbers are not arbitrary, they correspond to precise, 24-hour-long blocks of time. It is a 10-day countdown. Frantically, the team runs a new trajectory model. What happens in 10 days? The computer screen renders the result, and the last shred of hope vanishes. The countdown is not for a weapon. It is a clock. It is counting down to the exact moment that the entity's new, powered trajectory will intersect with the one coordinated broadcast of them, the rendezvous point in the deep Pacific Ocean. It has stopped broadcasting its warning. It has received our RSVP. It is no longer an "get." It is a "visitor." And it is arriving.